What was the jazz scene in Newark like in the early 60s and 70s?
The jazz scene was very good in Newark, especially when got out of the service. I came back from Vietnam in '68. My last duty station was right here in New Jersey, and there was a lot of great clubs in Newark at the time. There was Sparky J's and the Key Club were across the street from each other on William and Halsey Street, and that was a famous little jazz scene right there. There's a couple clubs on Broad Street, Newark, but Sparky J's was an organ room, and so was the Key Club for the most part. And you could hear all the great tenor players. They'd come, if they were in New York, they sure made a stop in Newark, and then after Newark, they'd go down to Asbury. There was a couple clubs in Asbury. So it was a lot of good jazz in Newark at that time, and it was free. You didn't have to pay cover like you did in New York. As for players, I used to play a lot of my favorite tenor players were always down there. Willis Jackson, Stanley Turrentine. You can just go on and on naming guys.
If you had like a favorite aspect to it, what would it be?
Well, I was always a B3 guy, organ, so I used to love to go hear a tenor and organ. That was my favorite. Whether it was like Willis Jackson, he'd have to play roaring. People loved when he played. Sonny Stitt, obviously. Good musicians, good. Not just always, don't misunderstand me, it wasn't always just tenor guys then. It was Wes Montgomery, trumpet guys. They all came through Newark. All the great guys came through Newark. It was a real hot spot. And on. A lot of these great players came out of Arts High in Newark. It was a great high school for performing arts. And that basically lasted through the late 70s.
That scene in Newark is really not just Newark. It's an extension of Newark going to the Oranges, Montclair, even going down to Elizabeth. I'm sure too. Bingo, the scene in Newark used to be a lot bigger. There's some clubs that were in Newark, people frequented. Not long ago, there was a spot called Duke's on Clinton Street. Now, a new spot is coming up. It's more blues and jazz on Clinton Street.
Newark's jazz scene, when I first came to New Jersey in 1990, I believe, was kind of vibrant with a lot of older musicians that kind of grew up in the city and around the city, still playing quite often. The famous drummer Eddie Gladden, that played with Dexter Gordon, and hometown hero Larry Young, the organist Larry Young, the famous CD he put out called, or not CD, recording called Unity. And Eddie Gladden, those guys grew up in and around Newark. And I would play with Eddie Gladden kind of often. There was another Eddie, Eddie Crawford, another fabulous drummer also. And these guys were a part of the fixture of the scene. And Don Williams, the drummer that played with Jimmy McGriff and so many famous organ groups, would be at the Peppermint Lounge, and people at Jasmine's down on Lock Street. And the scene was kind of like always very much like a great inner city scene. Since I come from Washington, D.C., I remember a lot of local guys that could really play that didn't want to be on the road, maybe didn't have the opportunity to go on the road, but still were playing a lot and had a lot of information. They were always around as visible entities and mentors. But the scene kind of started to shift with a hotel activity like the Robert Treat Hotel. At one time, there was a designated Newark Jazz Festival that only lasted, from what I can remember, maybe 3 years, 4 years maybe. And it was centered around the fact that Newark was an organ town, jazz organ town. And they had like basically an organ jam. And famous organists and local organists were involved, from McGriff to Captain Jack McDuff, Adam Schwartz, and so on. These people were at these festivals, and all kind of music would come through. Great singers like Pat Tandy from the area, and a drummer, local drummer also, Noel Sagerman, and saxophonist Leo Johnson. It was actually, I think, a Florida transplant to Jersey. He's been in New Jersey so long, a part of the whole Newark scene for so long. The other clubs that were around that I would go to, they were on their last leg, were like LC's, Wally's. Trumpets are still around in Montclair, but in terms of Newark, Newark wasn't just Newark at that time. It was the Oranges and Montclair feeding into that scene where people would be. It's really Essex County, and as a result, a lot of musicians on that scene live and work within Essex County, playing the music all the time, as well as going to New York and going out of town. But there's so many musicians, as far as what you would call the Newark scene, being the biggest city in the area, with the Oranges and Montclair surrounding it, that all live in Essex County and feed into the whole Newark scene to support NJPAC, to support WBGO, and all these different arts entities. Essex County is huge, and Newark is another one of those really important cities, especially if you start talking about the history of jazz and what they call the black music or chitlin circuit, coming up from North Carolina, Virginia, D.C., Delaware, Philadelphia, and then after that you were in South Jersey like Camden or Trenton, then you hit Newark before you got to New York. And a lot of times, if you didn't do well in Philly or Newark, New York, you weren't going to do too well.